So one day when I was in high school, my grandma came to me and said, Corey, could you give me a ride in your car? I thought, sure, okay. It's kind of weird, but whatever. So we were riding around and she said something to me that stuck with me the rest of my life. And you know what she said? She said, Corey, the Nelsons, they're some of the hardest workers around. But she also said, we're some of the hardest players around. And it made me really think. It made me reflect on my family. I thought about my grandpa, grandma, aunts and uncles, mom and dad, everyone around us. And I thought, they do work really hard. They really care about what they do. They're passionate, and they put a ton of energy into everything they do. But then I also thought, they do play hard. They love Coors Lights. They crush Coors Lights. And it made me really proud. And it made me think about our family and how it reflects the American values. And what we're going to talk about today is what the American values were and basically how they've been changing. And one thing that's interesting is traditionally the American family was based on things like delayed gratification, religion, family, and hard working. These are things that we prided ourselves on. But in the last 15, 20 years, things have started to change. We're not here to judge. We're just here to point out how changes are taking place. And if you're a marketer, these are things that you shouldn't be scared of. These are things that you should be grasping and excited about. So as we move in today's lesson, we're going to get into our first objective. Our objective of today is you will be able to use your real life experiences to see change in marketplace and society. So once upon a time, like I said, we had these desires in American culture that we all held very close to us. But over time, things have changed. And so this list of things that change is drastic. But we're going to talk about just a couple things. The first thing we're going to jump into before we get going is a vocab word. It's a vocab word that I think is pretty important for today's lesson. This is cultural values. Cultural values are widely held beliefs that affirm what is desirable. In this video, we're going to talk about 4 things. The first one is the modern family. The second one is instant gratification, or basically consumer debt. The third one is going to be a touch on minimalism. And then the fourth one is we're going to talk about the pandemic that started in 2020. So if you go back all the way to the 1950s, U.S. women accounted for about 1/3 of the labor force. And the third that were working were far from given a fair shot. Times have changed, and by 2020, they made up over 50% of the workforce. The number of dads staying at home is drastically changing. Now dads are staying at home. They're quitting their jobs. They're staying home, taking care of the kids. They're doing laundry. They're cleaning the house, cooking. Who am I kidding? I'm not a cook. My wife does everything. I'm a spoiled husband. She's an amazing wife. I'm the luckiest guy alive. I personally think about my sister. She's a successful businesswoman. She's extremely smart. She works really hard and she makes a lot of money. And I'm really proud of her. But she is what's reflecting multiple women in the workplace in today's world. Looking at statistics like this makes you realize the marketplace is changing, and it's changing fast. If you don't change as a marketer, you're going to fall behind. When looking at these numbers and how families have changed, you can see how times are changing. We're no longer living in the days of the traditional family, how we were back in the 50s or 30s. Everything's changing. If you're a marketer, you need to understand this, and you need to be changing with the times. But this that we talked about is just a drop in the bucket of what's changing. The number of things changing in the traditional family is drastic. It's so huge, and it's changing every single day. The next thing we're going to talk about is consumerism. And when I think about consumerism, I think about mainly instant gratification. Like I said in the beginning, we've had delayed gratification as one of our traditional values, but I think that's completely out the window. And we're going to look at a few numbers here in a second to sort of support my thoughts and why I jumped to this conclusion. But I mean, I just look at myself and I think like, man, I hate waiting for something. I worked hard 9 to 5. I put my time and my energy in, like my grandma said. I want to play hard. I want to buy new things. I want to get that big ass TV that's going to look awesome and I can watch the Vikings lose every Sunday on. Let's take a second and jump in here and look at these numbers. You can see the amount of debt has increased from 2019 to 2020 to every category but one, credit cards, which decreased almost $1,000 or 14%. But unfortunately, it's not all good. 75% of adults carry a balance from month to month. That is not a good number. It basically says people are spending more than they have. They're searching for that instant gratification and not delaying their gratification until they have the money to actually spend it. This is something that is definitely a change in our culture from what we talked about in the beginning. The next thing I briefly want to touch on is minimalism. Minimalism is something that kind of came about after the Great Recession in the early 2010s, and it had a lot of momentum throughout American society. But when we look back at those numbers, we can see that I don't think it had as much momentum as we like to believe it did. And it's still more of a niche thing than a mainstream thing. The last thing that we're going to talk about is the pandemic of 2020. To me, of course, this has tons of changes that have affected our culture, but there's one thing specifically that I want to focus on. And this is the people that have chose to stay at home and work at home with zero intention of ever returning back to the workplace. Judy! I think this is going to have a much bigger effect on our culture than I think people are giving it credit for. The world of Zoom. Eating at home alone every day. I told you my wife was an unbelievable cook. Look at this stuff. The last question I have for you future marketers is this. Have you ever studied abroad or spent time overseas for more than a couple weeks? What did you see? What did you notice? What's something that stood out to you? Why do you think these things stood out to you? What I want you to do is take a few minutes and look at these images. Did you notice one of them are different? If you were like me, an American, you notice one of them is from somewhere else. And the reason you notice that is because it's not from the US. It's something different. What you need to do as a future marketer is teach yourself to have that same feeling and be able to notice the same things, but this time in your home culture, your home country. How can you step back from society and notice what's happening and see people in their everyday lives? Because once you can step back and you notice people on their journeys, you'll start to notice things that you can do to better improve their journeys. And that's what a marketer's job is. Our job is not to exploit people. Our job is to make people more comfortable and make their lives and their journeys better. And by stepping back and noticing these things in their journey, you can do these things for those people. And that would be a great accomplishment to you as a marketer. So thank you so much for your time and your energy. I appreciate everything you do for this class. Have a great day, stay safe, and I'll see you soon.